is here and exactly what CARB is doing. Joining us now for that conversation, we welcome to the program Yael Ossowski, Deputy Director of the Consumer Choice Center. Yael, thanks for being with us here on AOA today. Hope you're doing well.
I'm doing great, Jesse. Thanks so much for having me on.
Let's just start and give folks, listeners here today, a little background on what exactly is going on here with the California Air Resources Board in regards to this in use locomotive regulation.
So, every state has some kind of environmental regulator for air resources, water resources. Particular to California, it is what we call CARB, California Air Resources Board, and they put together their little regulations on transportation, on industry, on anything that would impact the environment. And they put together a regulation that was late last year that would impact what they call in use locomotives. This is the in use locomotive regulation, and they wanted to pass essentially a regulation that would make it so that any train that passes through California's borders would have to adhere to new restrictions. And realistically, what they're trying to state is that the trains that pass through California by the year 2035 will have to be fully electric trains, and that those that are not fully electric would have to have some kind of hybrid model, and they would also be required to set aside a lot of money, each rail firm, for a spending account that could be used for environmental compliance. So it's a rule that was passed. Obviously, in a state like California, this went through swimmingly through all of the different regulations. But because of the U.S. Clean Air Act, it must receive a waiver from the EPA. And the EPA put out a request for comments. You had many different farmers, many different agricultural groups, many different transportation groups and consumers who put their comments together. And what we're just kind of waiting on now is what the final rule will be. And we'll kind of figure out whether or not the EPA will allow this rule to go forth. But it's already causing a lot of trepidation, not just for those rail firms, but also people that depend on it, particularly farmers, agricultural workers, and then also consumers that rely on that food and all those products.
Absolutely, absolutely. It makes me immediately think of a similar situation with Prop 12 that was enacted in California and some of the impacts it's had nationwide with some of the state regulations there. I know too. You mentioned this to me, Yael, that there has been some movement in recent days on Capitol Hill as well that relates to this whole situation with the California Air Resources Board. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so we have basically we have the Department of the Interior sets up the different budgets for the departments of the U.S. government, and there was a proposal that was put together for the next House Interior Appropriations bill that actually explicitly stops the EPA from spending any money attached to approving this waiver, which is a very backhanded way, very bureaucratic method by which Congress can actually stop the federal government and its agencies from applying any resources, time, energy, or anything towards a particular outcome. So that was just put out, I think, about 3 days ago, which realistically kind of kills it, but this could end up in the courts a bit later. You could have a bit more action. But again, it still does not negate what California is trying to do. It's just that they're not going to have a waiver, which sets them up for further liability down the road. And it really doesn't eviscerate the idea, which unfortunately I think is going to spread to other states like Washington, maybe like Oregon. And considering that so many trains have to pass through these states to reach the coast to export products, it really is going to have a big impact. So there's a kind of a small monkey wrench in the gears right now when it comes to this rule, thanks to Congress. But that's not really the end of the road for this.
We're talking with Yael Ossowski of the Consumer Choice Center, and I think about the consequences here. And you hit on a few of them already, and we could talk more about this. But obviously, a lot of exports. We have a lot of commodities that go out the PNW ports, for instance, to go to Asian countries and some of our export partners there for grains in particular. You have a lot of products, household products, and more, of course, that make their way through the California ports. And, you know, if something like this were to get enacted, I mean, That's a major burden I would have to think on all sectors of our economy, isn't it? I mean, you think about this, you're not gonna stop a train at the border just because you have a diesel engine. You're gonna hand it off to an electric engine at the border of these states. I mean, there just seems like there's a lot of potential problems here with this California Air Resources Board plan. It seems like.
Yeah, and this is there are comments made by Senator Ted Cruz to this effect. There actually are no fully electric locomotive trains in the United States or basically anywhere. We have hybrid models that some firms in China and Japan are testing out. We don't really have anything like this yet. So what California is aiming to do is it wants to shape the direction of an entire industry. And it assumes it's just impacting, trains and those that are going by your neighborhood and crossing through California. But realistically, you have trains that are, the fourth biggest provider of cars to rail firms are agricultural products, particularly corn, soybeans, all the rest. And these guys are going to have to somehow figure out how they can get fully electric rail cars put together in the next 9, 10 years. There's just not capital there. There's already a lot of money that's being put into trying to put down new rails or trying to follow a lot of regulations. And realistically, all this means is that all these firms are going to have to spend a lot more money. Transportation is going to get a lot more expensive. That's passed on to farmers, it's passed on to producers. And at the very end of the day, it comes down to our kitchen table, it comes down to our house. When we as consumers have to go buy products, we're not going to have the benefit of cheaper, lower CO2 train firms bringing those products to our doors. Instead, we're going to have more regulations. It's going to be a bit costlier to get this stuff going. And you have all kinds of competition. Thankfully, you do have the trucking industry, but those come with additional costs. And again, this is a cost calculation for consumers. It's a way that California would like to mandate some kind of technological change, but that's just not how the market works. It's not how innovation works. And unfortunately, we're going to be the ones saddled with the costs.
Yeah, very true. As we wrap up our discussion today, very good stuff, very insightful here. Is there any sort of common ground that we could maybe reach as we move forward? Or what could be kind of the end game here? Could there be some ways to kind of come together and make something work realistically or not? What do you think, Yael?
Well, I think here we do need to have a lot of innovation across all transportation sectors. It's something that we all need. It's something that every industry needs. And for us as consumers, if we had cheaper ways of getting stuff to our door or source products, zip sopping around the continent, that would obviously be better for us. The question is just how do you promote that innovation? California would like to implement mandates. They do this a lot. They've done it with Prop 65 and many other propositions that people have voted in. But realistically, it's up to private entrepreneurs, good competition, and we need to have innovators out there. I'm sure there will be perhaps an electric train that'll be developed in the next 2 decades. Is it going to be ready to supply every single rail line that hits California? I don't think so. But we'd love to see it happen. We just got to be sure we don't have too many stringent regulations. We allow the entrepreneurs to try to produce these kind of solutions. I have no doubt that this will happen in time, not because California mandates it, but because consumers demand it and they want cheaper products. All the agricultural producers want to have cheaper ways of shipping their goods as well. So I think the market in the end will deliver this. It'll take some time. I think we can just talk positively about innovation and perhaps how regulations are not helping us in this regard for right now.
Yeah, great thoughts. And I'm sure if folks want to stay up to date as this whole conversation develops, the Consumer Choice Center website, I'm sure folks could stay up to date there as you guys are talking about that and much more, right?
Yes, sir. That's consumerchoicecenter.org.